Hello, everyone. Welcome to Clear Mountain's Wednesday live stream. Today we have a pretty special event. When we came to Seattle, I began to meet with some of the groups in the area that had been using Dhamma to help people recover from addiction. And one thing I began to notice about those who were in those groups was just the sincerity of their practice. People who had found transcendence of addiction through the Dhamma, it wasn't an accessory in their lives, and they seemed to really intuit the meaning and importance of the practice, and also have to have insight into craving and dukkha in a way that I found really inspiring and also practically relevant to so many people who have loved ones dealing with addiction or who are dealing with it themselves. So today we have three really core members of Clear Mountain with us. We have Hiram, Bree, and Devin, and so glad to have you three join us. Thank you. So we're hoping to use this time to speak to all of your stories and insights for the sake of those listening. Please, if you're on the live stream, type in any questions or things you'd like to discuss in the chat. We'll have a chance to field those at the end. But to begin with, maybe we could center on you, Hiram. Just would you mind talking a bit about your path through addiction and how Dhamma helped you recover?
Oh, hello everyone. Thank you, Ajahn. I did quite a few years in the military, and it was a cultural kind of bringing of age to celebrate, and it became celebratory use of the substance of either alcohol or drugs, and then it became a coping skill for after my deployments. Um, so I used it quite often at the time, and it was trying to cover up a symptom that I was having, or it was a symptom, and it didn't become a skill anymore. Um, it was more of an addiction. When I retired, it came to the point where that's all I thought about. Um, was drinking and using drugs. That was my coping skill for post-traumatic stress, for nightmares. It was the cure-all for everything, and then it wasn't. And then when it wasn't, it became a hindrance where my time and effort had to go around to my addiction, my planning, my kids' time, my family time, work time. So it came to the point where suicide was one of the ways out. Um, I had been admitted to the VA hospital, and they had me in a straitjacket for about a week and under medical detox. And then I went to a program for like 3 months where they medically detoxed me and worked on the inner workings of my addiction and my symptoms and how I was going to overcome the thought of just ending it. Um, and they had me under, medical detox, which just numbs you to what's going on so you could accept and physiologically your body can come back to not having to deal with it. And that's where I got introduced to meditation. And not so much the Dhamma, but it was a meditation as a holistic approach to it. And I bumped into a group named Refuge Recovery while I was down there. My counselor told me, hey, they have a group that comes there. And I started attending them. And once I got released, that's all I wanted to find: refuge recovery, meditation societies, and the Dhamma was introduced by Refuge Recovery. And going to Seattle, while going to Seattle, uh, I think it was like 6 months later, this project called Clear Mountain happens to fall into my lap at Volunteer Park. And I've been getting the Dhamma ever since. And it's been a great journey so far. And now it's Dhamma based versus meditation based, which I used before. Using the Buddhist teachings and everyone around me. It's the environment, the teachings, the meditation helps a lot. It's part of my routine, which I have to do every day. And yeah, that had in 5 minutes, that's what I went through in my journey so far. And yeah.
What, Hiram, do you feel like if all you've been given is the meditation, would that have been enough to sustain like, what was the distinction for you between what's the Dharma as a whole given to you that just meditation you felt didn't?
I meditated before, when I was younger. And anyone that's been to a war zone, you tend to look inside to see how much more deeper you have to get that grit to keep going. And that 5-10 minutes of sitting back and just thinking, how much more do I have to endure? How much farther I have to go? I have to go whatever length I have to go. So that portion of it was kind of simple for me, but it was like one of the teachings, the Buddha's first teaching about suffering and going through that, breaking and analyzing what suffering actually is what kind of changed it for me. The Buddha's first teaching, the Four Noble Truths, it was like it bended everything, my universe, like in half, and everything just connected in the circle. And then from then on, I was hungry. I was like, there's something to this. So I think it changed my mindset on how I looked and analyze things.
What was the shift mainly just having a framework for suffering, or was that the shift, the bending of the world?
Yeah, it was the shift. Instead of me looking at suffering as, oh, I brought this upon myself, it's like I'm not so unique. It's a human it's human nature to suffer. It's just how you approach it and finding the solution to suffering and not looking at it as, oh, poor me. It's just me that's suffering. It's, I'm not a unique person. I'm not the only one that suffers. It's a constant human nature. Everyone does it.
And
So that nailed it for me.
and Hiram, and we'll move on to Bree and Devin in a second, but do you feel like once you have addiction, or maybe we're all addicted in some sense, but did you feel like it comes down to replacing an addiction to substance with one to Dhamma? Like, is there an in between, or is it pretty much you got to go? It's just in you to need to pour yourself into something with that sort of full on enthusiasm, one way or the other?
Oh, I see. Okay. Me myself, I'm a person that has a one of those character defects that I can replace something for another. I can get addicted to anything. It's one of the personality traits of, I think you either have it, you're born with it, genetically, or once you're addicted, you want to replace that happiness or and I have that trait, and I don't have that same feeling with Dhamma and addiction. It's two different. Yeah. One curbs a craving, and the other one is more like hunger for happiness. So Dhamma gives me the hunger for happiness. That I have a happy medium now, instead of shooting straight up and then crashing and then want to get back way up there. So Dhamma gives me that happy medium where I can say, okay, I don't have to be an overachiever, but I don't have to have the big L, tattooed on my forehead. So it makes me just right, I guess.
Thank you, Hiram. And I do remember you coming to those first meetings in Volunteer Park. They were, that was our beginnings.
Yeah.
Bree, can we move on to you? And what was your journey through addiction and how did Dhamma bring you out?
Yeah, so my journey through addiction, I often hear one of my favorite terms is that the opposite of addiction is connection. And if I were to synthesize down my entire journey, it was this quest for connection. And so, there's no possible way I could have named that at the time. I had substance use disorder counselors when I was trying to get clean. I talked to them and start opening up about some of the traumas I had experienced, and they'd be like, "Oh, those are the reasons that you use," and I'd be like, "No, I just like using drugs," and it was like the equivalent to freedom for me, but I wasn't ever really willing to ask myself, what am I trying to get free from? Like, what am I trying to get free from? And so, when I discovered heroin at the young age of 16, that was for me the feeling of love, or what I imagined to be the closest feeling of love that I had personally ever experienced. It was so profound, and I would talk to my friends about it who used, and they would all agree, like, yes, it feels like love. And, having experienced love today, I can say that, that's still true in a big way. Maybe a shadow side, opiates could be a shadow side of that similar feeling, chemically made. So, initially to some of the more common 12-step ways of abiding, they talk a lot about like God is going to come in and like save your experience and remove the addiction and all of that, and that never really resonated with me. And so I was able to sort of translate that into a different way when I discovered Buddhism, because that told me that I had, an inherent Buddha nature, and that was something that I could turn toward instead, rather than the whole, a little bit of like what Hiram was saying, like I'm just damaged goods and I'm just born wrong and all of the stuff that I had thought coming into it, that there exists this Buddha nature within me. So, yeah.
How long did that process take? And how, I mean, maybe it's still going on in its own way, but how, yeah.
How long? I would say that the willingness to, I got sober pretty young. I started getting sober when I was probably 17 years old. Didn't really stick, like it was a lot of start and stop until I was about 19. And then, had one little 4-day excursion between the age of 19 to now. So, yeah, I have 9 years consecutive at this time.
Congratulations. And what could you name, would you be able to pinpoint any kind of pivot moments in that, like points where things came together in a certain way and you saw something shift? Were there a few moments or one or two that really you could pinpoint in that way on the journey?
Yeah. I feel similarly to Hiram in a big way, that really beginning to understand my relationship to suffering, because that's one of the things that I feel that the recovery rooms, the Buddhist recovery rooms, we don't talk a lot about the Buddha. We talk more about Mara. And, really understanding my relationship to Mara and cultivating, initially I was like, Mara, I'm going to beat that Mara up and I'm going to toss them outside, and, learning through the practice to actually just be really gentle with that version of myself. We kind of bring a synonymous equation between Mara and our addictive mind. So, yeah, that was helpful.
Thank you, Bree. Devin, what about your story?
Sure, nutshell version. So I grew up with a lot of fear and repression. And so when I went to college 3,000 miles away was sort of the first time I was like, hey, I get to be my own person and experiment with all sorts of stuff. And unlike most people I know who are in Buddhist-based recovery, I actually discovered Buddhism way before I discovered recovery. So I actually became a Buddhist at 20. And I oftentimes share the ironic thing is that at a certain point I was really into the precepts. I had taken out Han's version of the precepts printed out on my fridge that I would then open to get booze out of. Like, I didn't see the disconnect there at all. It was very interesting. So I did have a lot of exploration of Buddhist concepts and a meditation practice. It was spotty at times, but I did have those things as part of my life. And I feel like they were part of the evolution of starting to understand myself. And I actually don't think that all of my addiction journey was all negative, because part of that experimentation was also part of coming to understand myself. Like through exploring the extremes, I could then have come to a place now where I have a more balanced place. But I did go to some pretty big extremes for quite some time. And I was pretty invested in image. I cared a lot about what other people thought about me. I was very definitely raised to have this like reputation focus. And so I would work really super hard, and then I'd party really super hard, and I would like swing back and forth between those things and be like a weekend warrior. And then I got a job where I didn't just have weekends. I had 3 months off for the summer if I wanted. And that really accelerated my descent into my addiction, because I could be blacked out for weeks, months on end and have no consequence. And so it wasn't until consequences started amassing in a more organic fashion rather than an external fashion, I started having more consequences, particularly around blackouts, like trying to piece together what I had done after a night of abusing substances, that damage to my relationships, to my self-confidence, to my safety were really starting to add up. I developed a lot of psychiatric kinds of symptoms. Near the end of my addiction, I had horrible panic attacks, insomnia, huge amounts of fear and insecurity just haunted me all the time. And I bought into a delusion that I was using substances to counteract that. I actually wore a Fitbit and would say, okay, if my heart rate is over 100, I must be having anxiety and I should use a depressant. So my rationalization skills were great, which is one of the things that's the most tricky about addiction for me, is that I tend to, in all the self-exploration I've done, rely on my brain and my thoughts, and to come to recognize that my brain and my thoughts are part of what's lying to me because it's a mental illness that's in my brain was a really hard truth to swallow. About 5.5 years ago, I did have my bottom where I did almost accidentally kill myself with an overdose, and I hadn't been feeling suicidal, and so it really did shake me up and shock me. I was lucky enough to have a loving friend who helped me recognize the severity of my situation and get me into rehab. And when I was in the rehab, it was very AA based. And I had been a practicing Buddhist, whether spotty or not, it had been important to me. And so I kept searching for some sort of Buddhist threads, and it wasn't really coalescing for me. So as soon as I got out of the rehab, like that week, I went to my first refuge meeting. And it just felt like such a natural fit. I did and do still use AA. I think there's a lot that's really wonderful about any system that's going to connect addicts to each other, because I think that it is really through connecting with each other and reflecting back to each other that we can see our way through to a truth more easily than we could on our own. And my practice has been so completely different since I got sober. I am not spotty anymore. I am quite serious about my practice now. And I know when things are hard that I have these tools to lean into. And this past year has been particularly challenging. And I'm going to be going on my 6th silent retreat for the year soon, because I know when things are really hard, I can fall back on old habit patterns, or I can lean into the Dhamma, and I can lean into the connection of practice in our community. So I've been really grateful for Clear Mountain being part of that. It's been really interesting having a lot of people in our community who do have both experience in recovery and Buddhism, but not have that be the only focus. It feels like it allows me to do more of drawing my own connections and conclusions, whereas when I'm in Buddhist-based recovery meetings, that's the main focus. So it's more independent in that way.
Thank you, Devin. If you three had to speak about some of the unique aspects you saw between AA and refuge recovery or Buddhist recovery programs, what would they be? I mean, obviously one's Buddhist and one's not, but what kind of teachings really stood out to you? It sounds like the concept of Mara was helpful, the Four Noble Truths. Have there been any other practices or teachings which have really kind of burnt themselves into your hearts?
I could chime in. I think that support-based. Devin mentioned it earlier about like-minded, experience-based feedback. You need that. You need somebody to call you out on your BS. Because sometimes you can fool yourself into thinking, yeah, this is the perfect plan. My recovery plan is working, and somebody will be like, red flag, 15-yard unnecessary roughness. They'll throw a red flag on you and go like, you better look at that you better look at that again, because that might not be useful. And that's what I like about it. People, you have to get, and it was mentioned earlier, that connectiveness. If you don't have a friendship like that, tough love, you have to have it with someone that you see every week or every two times a week, that you have trust in what they're saying because of their experience. You can tell that it's coming from the heart. Please don't do that. This has happened to me, and I know, either a mentee or my mentor told me, and it happened to me, and then you can trust their experience. So try to learn by other people's mistakes. It's a good rule, but us people. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hiram. Bree, Devin?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. What came to mind when y'all were talking was there's like an old NA saying that says the therapeutic value of one addict helping another is without parallel. And, you know, I think that's so true. So many of my greatest teachers have been other people in recovery rooms, because there's this culture in the rooms that requires raw honesty. And that is so unlike any place that I have ever experienced. You know, that, you know, we sit around in a circle and we talk about what's happening. And I would feel like, especially when I was new, you know, people were crawling inside my head and saying the things that I was thinking out loud, and, you know, things that I had never dared to say out loud. And, you know, I expect that, you know, most people actually do think and experience things in the same way, but that sort of culture is not super relevant in any place that I've personally seen. So yeah, and then, you know, as far as also just seeing people with, you know, lots of recovery time also still speaking in this way, you know, I think that was also really helpful, because it helped me sort of have the acceptance that it's okay. You know, like if this person's experiencing it, they've got 20 years sober, then I can also experience this too.
Thank you, Bree.
The one thing that comes to my mind as kind of a counterpoint is that there's a balance between what we get from others and trusting that we each have our own path. Because I find that in AA, there's a lot of this, like, just trust this sky daddy person, like whoever that is that you think is above you, that is better than you. You need to humble yourself in front of them and do what they say. And that I find to be really a hard sort of paradigm for a lot of people to buy into. And I share with mentees when I start working with them the parable about, if you meet the Buddha on your path to recovery, you should kill him. Well, why? Because you'll think that he can tell you the way, but it's your path on your, you know, sorry, not your path to recovery, your path to enlightenment. And so I share this with mentees in order to tell them, I'm not going to tell them what they have to do. And I have a lot of people who, when they start working in those types of relationships, want to just have advice or direction. And I can share my experience and I can share what I've seen, but ultimately they have to try it out and see what works for them.
So a lot of these elements seem like things you could kind of stumble across in most groups where addicts would come together and speak about their experiences and share with one another. What are the particular elements of the Buddhist path that you found have really proven useful or foundational to the recovery? You've spoken to some of them, but I'm curious if that question brings out any more.
Ajahn?
Yep, go for it.
Forgiveness. You have to forgive yourself, first of all, which is a huge thing, because I was used to forgiving others and letting them forgive me, but I wouldn't forgive myself, and, you know, I punch myself, or, you know, damage myself, and I get right back to where I was before. So that's a big thing. Forgive yourself, and then, you know, forgive others, and then hopefully they'll forgive you after you make amends. And it might take forever, but, you know, that's what you got to do. And love and forgiveness. If you don't love yourself, I mean, you can forgive yourself, but if you don't love yourself, you're right back to step one. You know, so you have to learn how to do that. At least that has worked for me.
Thank you, Hiram. Bree, Devin, does anything come to mind? If not, I have other questions for you, but I want to drop that one in case something's there.
The only other thing that sort of comes to mind is, you know, before I really delved into my practice, it wasn't very clear to me that my mind wasn't an instruction manual to follow. So I do feel that meditation practice does end up becoming such a valuable relapse prevention tool. And that, that for me, I experience lots of craving, for substances or, even feelings for suicidality. And, those exist even today. And meditation helps me understand that those aren't personal, and that I have freedom of choice or freedom of I won't.
Devin,
I
anything?
like having the toolkit that Buddhism gives us. That I felt like there, when I arrived in doing a Buddhist-based recovery program, that I would bring up one or another concern, and there would always be a meditation that could be recommended. It's like, oh, you're struggling with that. Why don't you practice forgiveness? Why don't you practice some loving kindness? Why don't you practice right? And so there was actual things I could do. And I really liked having that full toolkit of things to be able to use.
One thing I want to ask is, two of you have spoken about suicidal ideations. Devin, you've spoken about these long periods of blank out. And the Buddha speaks about 3 kinds of craving: that for sensual pleasures, that for becoming, and that for annihilation. And it strikes me that most people think that opiates or drugs are based in the desire for sensual pleasures, but it strikes me that in a lot of your stories, the biggest desires for annihilation. What do you see as the root of addiction? Bree, go for it if you got it.
Hiram also looked like he had something on the tip of his tongue.
Okay, Hiram, you first.
Oh wow, yeah. That I asked myself that a lot, especially when I first got sober. I think I made excuses all my life with childhood trauma, nightmares, experiences, and I used it. I used it as a crutch. I used it. It was like my way of going. Like this is my little home. No one can come inside, and keep the whole world out. And that got me in trouble, trying to seclude myself from everyone else. This is, my unique experience. You don't know what I'm going through. Wah, wah, wah. And then the world gets smaller and smaller when I thought that. And yeah, so I thought it was a unique experience that no one else had gone through what I went through. So finding what I was suffering from, identifying that, and then setting my symptom of addiction to the side and getting to the root of it was therapeutic. Getting medical attention, psychological attention, that it solved a lot of things. Why my addiction was so strong, why the craving for it was so strong. I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know if I went off.
No, I think you spoke about, this, you've spoken about love and forgiveness, and also about the unifying and opening aspects of that shared experience of dukkha, that it's not just you. And
Yeah.
I think you've laid things out perfectly.
Yeah. I like that you said the root. One of the analogies that I've used is that, and you also said symptom, right? So an analogy I've used a lot is that like there's like a bush, and there's like the addiction branch, and there's the suicidality branch, and then there's the Too Much True Crime docuseries brand, and at the root of it is an untreated pain from, I wasn't, and I don't think a lot of people, especially in our culture, are taught, how to deal with challenging emotions. Often, at least my experience, I, had some really traumatic things happen in my life, and it was just like, okay, now we're moving on, and I never really got to process those. And what I found later in my recovery, this wasn't the first thing that I did, was that all of those things still sat within me, and they needed to come out and be processed in real time. And the triggers that I would experience that brought me back to those places, the Dhamma actually helped me process those things for the first time in real time. So that's still happening, but yeah.
Thank you, Bree. I like the Too Much True Crime docuseries branch. I don't think we've done a live stream on that quite yet. Devin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I do also think that my addiction has many faces it can take. My partner, when I went into the rehab at that time, said that I had the Hydra of addictions, that he'd see me just cut off like, oh, I shouldn't smoke marijuana. I'll just do K instead. Like, oh, I should not do K. Why don't I do a lot of nitrous? Why don't I would just always find something else. It's like water flowing downstream, right? If you block one path of the stream, it's just going to keep flowing. And I find that for myself, it was all ways of trying to control how my core wounds, my past trauma had manifested and impacted myself and others, and I thought I could control it. And I think that was my biggest error of judgment, was that it was something that I could exert. I could hide from people, I could choose how it came out, I could whatever, and none of that was actually true. And that the Dhamma allows us to have the strength to sit through all the different manifestations that come up. And we may find new manifestations, it may be that they're not quite as dramatic or damaging, but they do still come up. And so when I find myself trying to avoid, I've had a lot of escapist fantasies lately. I could just move to Amsterdam, right? Like, these things could be the solution, or in fact, I could just sit with what is going on.
We're glad you're not in Amsterdam yet, Devin. People should feel free to type questions into the chat, but I wanted to ask, for people who have a loved one, a child, a spouse, a parent struggling with addiction right now, and I know a lot of people in our community have children dealing with fentanyl and other addictions. What would you tell someone who has a loved one in that situation? What advice would you give them?
I would, Ajahn, if I may, patience is one thing. Have patience, huge boundaries, and recommend therapy, detox, and follow-up. You have to have boundaries because addicts just tend to be a little overbearing. They can get they can get genuinely like really smart just to find the next fix. They become geniuses. So be patient, huge boundaries, and recommend the detox, even if it has to be medical detox, rehab. Yeah, that's just to begin with.
Thank you, Hiram. Bree.
Yeah, this was something that I, have done some work as a substance use disorder counselor. And one of the things that I always really struggled with, because I worked with youth, was getting the parents to understand that this was a family disease, and that they have just as much of a role in this as the person suffering with the addiction themselves. That it's different, but I think it's easy for people to sort of point the finger at the addict and be like, look what they're doing. They're so difficult, and not really being willing to look at, where is my codependency at? Am I willing to put in the work and the effort to seek help? Because often that is a huge part of it. And then equanimity practice, so much equanimity. I think that what Hiram was saying about just you're not gonna, it's not going to happen on your time ever.
Devin?
The only thing I would add is the value of honesty. I think about my ex-wife when I was going through my last phase of addiction, had been raised by a person, it was an adult child of an alcoholic, and had been raised in alcoholism. And so she never actually said the word alcoholism or addiction to me. She said she was concerned about my health or my well-being, right? She sort of pussyfooted around it. And there were other people who were very kind and expressed concern, but didn't do it as directly as they might have. And I think that it's okay to say things like, I'm scared for you, or this is impacting us in this way. And so I think that those are some of the hard conversations that people can have, but only if they have that sort of bedrock of having done some codependency work, like Bree mentioned. I think that that's pretty essential to be able to offer compassionate confrontation to somebody who's really struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, all three. We have some comments. Devin and I are basically the same person. LOL. Good. Karen is commenting, bless you, Hiram, Devin, and Bree. I deeply admire what you've accomplished.
Thank you.
Rick, how important has it been to help others in recovery versus focusing on inner cultivation? Go for it, Hiram.
Okay. I was waiting for Bree or Devin. But that's what it's all about. Once you got it, pay it forward. Only an addict could understand another addict, and you can't give it if you don't got it. So you have to cultivate yourself first. You have to make yourself safe to give advice, and if you're not safe, don't give advice. If you're if you're not good, do not become a mentor to another addict, because you both will be using at the same time, and that is not good for anybody. So yeah, tough love.
Bree, Devin?
Thank you.
Devin, do you want to start? Go ahead.
Sure. I was just talking about this actually on Saturday with somebody after Clear Mountain, because between my refuge meetings and Clear Mountain, and then meeting with mentees 3 days a week, I have something that I am doing that keeps me focused on Buddhism and recovery 6 days out of the week. So I find that commitment to showing up and that sort of structure and that sense of purpose that being of service gives me is incredibly helpful. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me moving forward. And if it were just up to me, there might be times where I just wanted to get some extra sleep or something, but because I'm secretary in the meeting, I'm going to show up because I have to unlock the temple to have the meeting. Right. So, it's actually really essential for me to have those helpful motivations.
Bree?
Yeah. Such great things already said. I definitely agree, and sort of the old school 12-step vernacular, they talk about addiction being a very selfish disease. And, I can say that that was my experience, when I was sort of saturated in my addiction, and that being able to get outside of myself and cultivate that quality of generosity really allowed me to, experience joy in different ways than I had before. And, I do truly believe that, be it any, dharmic quality that, I'm trying to cultivate, I only keep it by giving it away. And so that's, yeah.
Do all three of you have any, we have to wrap things up, but any final resources to leave people with who are maybe struggling with addiction, who are watching this? Any websites they could visit? Devin.
I was going to say, I just had a member of my Tuesday night meeting point out to me this week that there is a website called Northwest Buddhist Recovery, and that they list all different Buddhist-based recovery programs. I know that the three of us know each other through Refuge, but there are other ones also available. So that's a great place to have sort of a clearinghouse of all sorts of different resources.
Thank you, Devin. Bree?
Yeah, shout out to the Washington Recovery Helpline. I did some intern work there for a while, and such a fantastic people on the other side of that phone, so human. So if you're looking for resources in your county, if you live in Washington State, they'll hook you up. But I know a lot of states have very similar programs.
And Hiram?
Just piggyback on that. That's probably the smart thing to do. But simple things, when you go see a doctor, seek medical attention. They get trained for that. Yeah. One of the easiest thing is go to a medical professional and go, I got a problem. Can you help out? Absolutely. And they will help you. Don't be afraid of professional help. And then find a support system after you get out, after you're clean. Find some therapist that's going to give you a great relapse recovery program, and stick to it. Meditate, medicate if you have to professionally from a doctor, and listen to music sometimes if you have to. Music, meditation, and some Dhamma, and you'll go long ways.
And if you ever need a little bit of a pep talk from Hiram, Bree, or Devin, we are at St. Mark's every Saturday. So thank you, all three of you, for sharing your stories.
Thank you, Ajahn.
It's a real blessing.
Thank you.
So for those who want to join us, we'll be going onto Zoom now. I'll paste the link in the chat. You can also find it on clearmountainmonastery.org. About halfway down the page, there's a link to the Wednesday evening Zoom. And if you feel like joining us there for a more intimate discussion, you can do so. Devin, Bree, Hiram, take care.
Thanks, everybody.